So welcome. We are here to do a webinar. The topic for today is how to prepare for divorce or survive the one you're going through. And my name is Melissa Rosenberg, and I'm here with Michelle Dellino of Dellino Law Group. I'll tell you just a quick brief about myself, and then I'll introduce you to Michelle, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm actually a mental health professional, and I work as a both individual and a couples therapist in private practice, specializing in working with clients who are going through relationship transitions. So that means clients in all stages of the divorce process or who are contemplating divorce as well. I work with a lot of clients who are in kind of an ambivalent space about whether they want to continue their relationship or not. And, sorting through that ambivalence and deciding what the best path forward for them would be, and helping them come to that conclusion and then be able to support them in making the next step. And that sometimes is separation, and sometimes that's relationship repair. So I definitely support clients in all stages and all phases of relationships and relationship transitions. And I do work closely with Dellino Law Group and with Michelle's team. And we're here to talk to you today about survival of the divorce process. And I do think that emotional support is a huge part of that. So I'm happy to be part of this webinar today. And I will let Michelle go ahead and introduce herself in just a moment. I want to also say that we're here on Zoom today. So thank you for any tech glitches, patience with having any tech glitches that may or may not come our way. We're going to deliver a bunch of information today, and if there's time, we'll try to answer any questions that you might have. I can't promise that we'll get to all the questions, but if you do have questions, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom screen. I just also want to note that if you ask a question there, it will populate your name unless you choose to be asking it anonymously. So you can opt to be anonymous, or you can opt to use your name when you put a question in the Q&A. But that's the way that you can pitch a question to us, and we will try to get to questions. I can't guarantee, depends on our time today. But thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to Michelle.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'm Michelle Dellino. I am the owner and managing attorney at Dellino Law Group. We are a full-service family law firm with 6 attorneys and a big support staff, which means we have a lot of people to support you. It also means we get a lot of questions about divorce. What do I do to prepare for divorce? What if I'm thinking about it? How do I protect myself? All kinds of stuff like that. And it's maybe surprising, but near the end of the year, we get a lot of people who are thinking, I might do this next year. I'm not sure. And so it's a really good time to kind of go over a high level overview of how to prepare for divorce. And also, if you're in the middle of a divorce, what you can do and some things that might be coming up. So I'm going to talk a lot about that today. And like Melissa said, if you have questions, pop them in the chat to her. I think, Melissa, did you tell them how to make sure it goes only to you, or will it automatically do that? I just think people might want to be sure. You're on mute. Still on mute.
Sorry about that. So I mentioned the Q&A. So if you put it in the Q&A, it will come up as your name. Everyone will see the question, or you can make it anonymous and everyone will see the question. There is also a chat feature, and that's also an option. I'm going to shift it right now so that you can only chat with me. So if you want to ask a question, you can also do it in the chat. And if you do that, then only I will see that.
Great.
So that's how that's set up. So either of those are places that you can ask your questions.
Yeah, just keep in mind that if you put it in the Q&A, unless you mark it as anonymous, everyone's going to see it, which is not a problem for us. I just like to make sure people know that as we get started. So anyway, I'm going to go through a lot of information. If you have questions, feel free to pop them in there. We'll try to get to them. If not, we'll talk about next steps if you want more information. Also want to note, and Melissa will talk about this at the end, we do these every month. So different topics all the time. Some topics may apply to you, some may not. We also have a meetup group that we'll touch on at the end too, if you're interested. But anyway, this is about you getting information, because the one thing that I see in over a decade of family law practice is people feel like they can never get enough information, whether they're getting ready for a divorce or they're in one. It's kind of like a constant discovery process. So I think it's important to go in with knowledge. So with that said, let's get started. Let's talk about, if you were going to prepare for divorce, what that would look like. I like to tell people this. Sometimes you don't get to prepare. Sometimes you just get served with paperwork that you weren't expecting. Sometimes maybe you knew things weren't going well, but all of a sudden you're faced with paperwork, or you're faced with your spouse telling you, I'm moving out, or I want you to move out. So you can be looking at this from 2 sides of the coin. One, I want you to know, if you're watching this and you're thinking about divorce, You're thinking things are going to get better, and maybe they will, but a lot of the time people stay in that limbo state until something happens that makes them feel like they have to act. So I'm telling you this because the average person thinks about divorce for 2.5 years before they take any steps. That's kind of what the statistics have borne over the last 5 or 6 years at least. So it's very normal for you to be thinking, I want to do this, but I'm not sure, or are there other options? And we'll get to that in a little bit. But please realize you're not alone if you're thinking that way. And then you could be on the other side where you're thinking, oh, maybe the other shoe's going to drop. Maybe the other person is going to move forward with this. Maybe we've talked about it. I don't know. Or maybe you have no idea and you just get blindsided, because that happens too, unfortunately. So the questions I see a lot in the beginning: how do I protect myself? What are my next steps? How bad is this? How can I afford to pay my bills? Those are all really common questions. Everyone wants to know these things. There's answers to be had. Uncertainty really keeps you fearful. It keeps you up at night. It keeps you wondering. You're scared for any number of reasons. And so there are answers to be had. However, it takes a bit of a process to get there, and it doesn't look the same for everyone. So I tell people what you should do is look at getting what I would call a divorce education. And by coming here, you're starting that process. So that's fantastic. You learn more about the issues in your divorce. You learn how they're going to be decided, different approaches to divorce you can take. And the better prepared and more information you have, the more you can decide how you want to move forward. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you have to, but maybe you don't, and you want to take some chance to see if you can repair the relationship, or maybe you know what, this is it and you need to move forward. So the first thing I tell people is get your team together. And that sounds obvious, but a lot of people just think, oh, I need an attorney, or they think I don't want an attorney because that's going to make things worse. Well, I tell people this, and I'm just going to say it right off the bat, because if you've ever seen any other meetup or webinar with me, you may have heard it or seen it. And I like to tell people, I think I'm a fairly bright person. I know a lot about a lot of things just from the work that I do. But if I need to do my business taxes or even my personal taxes, I have a CPA do that. If I need to do bookkeeping, I have an accountant do that. If I, hurt my knee skiing and need to repair my ACL, as much as I might think that I'm a smart person, this in the same way that I would not perform surgery on myself, I do not recommend that you go through a divorce without at least some legal consultation, because a divorce is the most complex and most involved legal contract you're ever going to enter into. So dissolving that deserves and really demands that you have someone who knows what they're doing look at it. Even attorneys that don't do family law get divorce attorneys. When I got divorced, I got a divorce attorney. If I have a question about employment law, I don't try to figure it out myself. I go to an employment law attorney. So there's a variety of things, but the point is get your team together. And yes, it should involve an attorney, but it should also involve other professionals. So a divorce is really what I would call a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not going to be over with right away. Aside from the rarest of circumstances, the process can feel super lonely. You'll want to give up. You'll want to go to sleep till it's over. You'll want it to be over with. The first thing I hear about is, I want this over now. Well, it's going to take time. So you can't do this without support. You need more than just your parents or your kids on your side. You need a team that understands what you're going through. So it should consist of people who will help you in all the appropriate ways. Obviously, legal, you need an attorney. Some people think they can do it themselves, but trust me, you could be leaving a lot of money on the table or overpaying or any number of things if you don't get help. You also needed a good attorney that will tell you the truth, not necessarily just what you want to hear, but also what you need to hear, what's really likely to happen. I can't stress this enough to you. You'll save a lot of time and money if you are transparent with your attorney and you want your attorney to be transparent with you. And I'm going to tell you 3 rules at the end to look at when evaluating an attorney or other types of help. Another one is emotional and therapeutic. So your attorney is definitely not your therapist. So we're not qualified to do that kind of work. And even though as an attorney, I can tell you, we really care. And I do. One of my favorite things is actually talking to my clients and realizing what they're going through. Sometimes I can tell you your legal options, but I might have a client where I realize I can't help you process this in the way that you need to be able to move forward in your case. And that's where someone like Melissa, or if you already have another therapist, somebody on your emotional support team that really knows what you're going through and can help you with some of those coping skills and help you plan how to deal with it from an emotional perspective is so critical. And one of the reasons why is cost of divorce. People think of their divorces as costing a lot of money. Yes, this can be true, but a lot of the time, and I say that's not just from personal experience and having had hundreds and hundreds, actually probably thousands of clients now, but also just from knowing the industry, a lot of clients spend a lot of time talking to their attorneys at a very high hourly rate about things that we can't help with. And I'm not, again, not saying that we don't care, but the reason an attorney's rate is so high compared to a therapist or some professional services is because it's specialized knowledge and it should be used for legal work. And sometimes we need to know what's going on with your life to really know how to deal with that. And family law is a lot more human based than, tax law or something like that. So I'm going to want to know about your family, and I want to know what happened, but at a certain point, I can't help you process that. And you need an emotional support person on your team. Some people just want transition therapy to help them through it. Some people want something ongoing. Sometimes you might want family therapy with your kids. There's all kinds of different things. And Melissa too mentioned something really earlier, which we didn't get into, and I'm going to have her circle back on it in a minute after I go through all the people you want on your team. And that is, if you're in this state of not knowing, there is divorce ambivalence counseling, which can help you figure out to stay or go. There's discernment counseling for couples, which can be really helpful if one partner wants to leave the relationship and the other doesn't. And then there's, like I said, there's transition counseling and just regular individual counseling that you might need when you're going through the situation. So those are really great things. I also want you to know that a good divorce attorney is going to ask you, probably not to pry into your business, but to know, hey, have you guys gone to therapy? Did you really explore, everything? I say that a lot to clients when they come to me and they're like, I just want out. Well, if there's a reason for that, but if they haven't even talked to the other partner about it, I'm not saying I'm pushing them into therapy, but a divorce attorney isn't necessarily just pushing you through divorce. So just so you know, we care about you as the whole person. I think is very important. The next thing you're going to need, attorney, you have the legal team that you need, and you need a team too, not just one person, because otherwise you have one person, they go on vacation or they're out sick and your whole case comes to a halt. You don't want that. So we've got that, we've got emotional therapeutic, and then we have financial. So financial is a big reason why marriages break down, and it's a big stressor in the relationship. A lot of people also stay in a relationship simply because they're in a situation where they feel like they can't afford to leave. They don't know how the finances will divide across two households. They don't want to deal with the conflict of dividing what is separate and what is community property, which is a whole other discussion, things like that. So you really need, basically, you need to find a way sometimes for resources that sustained one household will now have to sustain two, and what's that going to look like? So a financial advisor is often a very important part of your journey, and a lot of the time, a good financial advisor for your case will have walked other clients through divorce, can also tell you how to make the most of assets that you have post-divorce to generate income for you, can help you get a good picture on whether you should be trying to retain liquid or illiquid assets, so retirement assets, 401ks, 403bs, things like that, versus brokerage accounts, things like that. So we know a lot about that as attorneys, but and not in every situation do we bring in a financial advisor, but I do think it's great for clients to talk to one and have an idea on what makes sense for them. And sometimes they become an important part of our team. So that's another person on your team. Insurance, this is another thing. No one likes to talk about insurance. I mean, it's boring, and it's just one of those things that you just want to be taken care of. And a lot of people think insurance, okay, auto insurance, home insurance, you think health insurance, all these different kinds of insurances, life insurance, things you don't think about, but they kind of rear their ugly head in divorce because people need to get new policies. People need to make changes to the policies that they have. You might have no idea because maybe your spouse always handled that. That's so common. You have no idea what insurance you have. You have no idea what insurance you need. So it's really great to be connected with a broker who can help you, not just calling, maybe the same place you've always used, but talking to someone who can help you. And there's never a cost to you for that, to figure out what your best options are. And if you do that sooner in the process, it relieves a lot of uncertainty. It's just kind of one thing you can have checked off. We always, refer our clients to someone to help with that. Real estate. Another person you might need on your team is a real estate professional. Now, even if you don't own real estate, you still have a real estate issue. Even if you don't know if you're going to keep your house or sell it, you still have a real estate issue because you got to live somewhere. So it's really, really good, whether you're thinking about renting or buying something post-divorce, or whether you're staying where you are, to talk to someone who can help you figure out if that makes sense from a financial perspective and really what your options are. It doesn't mean you have to do anything, but you really should consult with somebody to understand that. And there are actually certified real estate divorce professionals. I work with one who's really awesome. There are others, not just her, but there's others out there, and they really understand how real estate plays into the divorce process. They can help work with two spouses, even if somebody is being difficult. And it just is a really good to have a professional step into that space and not have it become extremely emotional. So anyway, you need somebody in your real estate team to at least advise you of your options. Because again, I can do my best with that, but I'm not a real estate person, even though sometimes I play one on TV, right? Just kidding. Okay, so the next thing that you really, really need related to that is you need to talk to a lender. And the reason I'm going to say this is because sometimes you might make decisions during your divorce as far as spousal maintenance or property division goes and just think, oh, I'm going to buy something when this is over. And then you find out things from talking to a lender, like you need to have X amount in spousal maintenance for 3 years to even qualify for a loan. And maybe you decided, oh, I don't want to do that. And so now you don't show as much income. So talking to a lender early in the process, if you're even thinking about buying, to know what is necessary and have your lender talk to your attorney about your settlement and maybe ways that you do or don't want to structure it depending on your goals is so important. I hate it when I get people that come later and sit and their options are foreclosed. So I never want that to happen for anyone. Okay, the next thing after talking about all of those for people on your team is you need somebody to help with your kids if you have them. So divorce can hurt kids, or it can actually really, really help. So I've got a whole thing, I've talked about that before, but just know that avoiding lasting drama and negativity during the process is so key. If you have kids, you need to know they're not your emotional support. If you try to use them as your emotional support, even if you don't realize you're doing it, it only hurts them, and the court won't like it if you do that. So even if your child is 5, 15, or 25, don't use them as your emotional support, and make sure they have their own support. Don't speak negatively about the other parent in their presence, or even indirectly to other people. You'll want to find people to be on their support team and yours. So maybe a child therapist, maybe it's a favorite coach, maybe it's a team leader, maybe it's a school counselor. You want to tell people that are in your child's life what's going on so they can have, the support that they need. It also, they benefit from ice cream or frozen yogurt dates where you talk about them and not you and not what's going on in the divorce. So doing that is extremely important. Taking them for mud pie at Red Robin also really helps. It's something I hear. So things like that, making your kids and making sure they have a team as part of your team is a super great idea, because you need support in how to adjust to this new normal with them. It's not going to be easy, but it could be a really good thing. So bottom line on this first part is just about your team. Divorce is a journey. It's scary. You should not go through it alone. I highly recommend that you get your mind right, you get exercise, you get your body right, you get your team together, and you say, you know what, I'm pretty much about to run a marathon here. And the next step I'm going to talk about is what we call the information deep dive and all the stuff that you're going to have to get together to do that. But I do want Melissa to just chime in a little bit about the emotional support piece, and also for anyone out there that might be in the ambivalent stage, because I think her information is really critical and it's not something that I do. So Melissa.
Yeah, thank you. Michelle mentioned that a lot of people contemplate divorce or separation for, I think you said an average of 2.5 years before actually moving forward with it. And I just wanted to say that I think that ambivalence and feeling kind of frozen or paralyzed in your emotional process is such an uncomfortable place to sit. But it's conflicting. There's so much to sort through. There's all these logistics. There's all these competing and conflicting emotions, and people, really get stuck in that space for a long time. And so there's a couple of different ways that you can work with that in the therapeutic space. So divorce ambivalence counseling that Michelle mentioned is something that I do and sort of tailor to somebody who's in this very situation. And really just kind of take a very problem-solving, pragmatic approach to helping a client sift through this ambivalence, and doing it in sort of a short-term, problem-focused, solution-focused sort of way, with the goal of determining what fork to take in the road and actually making some steps down that fork. It might mean, really sort of sorting through that this is the route you want to take, that you do want to move forward with separation. And if that's the case, really kind of understanding what that's going to take emotionally, and not logistically as well, but emotionally, and how you're going to make sure that you can do that and actually take some of the steps that maybe you've been fearing taking for a really long time. And sometimes in other clients that I work with, it actually means trying to work toward relationship repair. And so I'll work with clients in that direction as well, trying to either pull their partner in for some couples counseling, or try to determine what steps need to happen in order to shift this relationship to a space that's going to feel more comfortable. So divorce ambivalence counseling, I think, is really something that people don't talk a lot about, but is really, really important. And I've been able to really have the honor of working with a lot of clients through these really tough times. Michelle also mentioned discernment counseling, and that's also similar in approach, but it's for couples. It's for couples where at least one of the spouses or partners is considering divorce or separation, where one of the spouses or both are kind of leaning out of the relationship, and but not yet ready to kind of make that determination. And it also is kind of a short-term, problem focused, solution focused approach to sort of helping this couple determine what their best path forward is going to be. Ultimately, there's only three choices. Either you're going to move towards separation, you're going to figure out a way to make this relationship healthier and repair it, or you're going to stay where you're at in this very, uncomfortable position. And usually by this point, if you're coming to talk to a counselor about it, or if you're listening to us now, that doesn't feel like an option anymore. It's important to either kind of make a decision in one way or the other. And discernment counseling, if you do decide that you're going to try to work on the relationship, the idea then is that divorce gets taken off of the table for at least 6 months while the couple commits to actually working on the relationship. With divorce lingering as a threat or a bargaining chip, it doesn't really lend to the most healthy relationship repair. So if that's the decision that you make in that discernment counseling approach, then you would move into a more classic couples counseling, marriage counseling, to try and repair the relationship, or do some of that deeper work on making that happen. So those are a couple of different things. Transition therapy and regular individual therapy are also, definitely things that I work with people with all the time. I mean, at different stages of the divorce process, you might be able to utilize emotional support, whether it's a high conflict situation. I mean, just the stress of going through this process and possibly dealing with court and possibly dealing with your partner you're separating from, sorting through how you're handling the transition with your children. That's definitely something I work with individuals a lot around, is kind of how to sort through how to be there for yourself, but also be there for your kids at the same time. That's really hard. And so individual therapy can be really, really useful in having an outside person be there for you while you're also trying to hold it together and be there for everyone else. So just highly recommend emotional support during this time in all stages, and post divorce as well, as you're trying to kind of pick up all the pieces and navigate your next chapter.
Great. I think that's totally important. And honestly, it gives you another safe space that you need during this time, because you'll need it. I want to talk about information, because a lot of people are thinking, what am I going to have to know to get started with this process? I call it taking the information deep dive. You're going to feel like it's invasive when you go through divorce, because we need to know everything. And these are just some things that you can start thinking about and getting together. And a lot of people might already know this if they're in the process. A lot of people don't, but you're going to need basics. And so you might think you know it all, but when you're under stress, it makes sense just to have it all written down in one place, because you're going to need it. You're going to need to provide full legal names for you, your spouse, any children. You're going to have to provide birth dates for everyone, social security numbers for everyone, addresses for you and your spouse if you're living apart. If you lived out of state, you're going to need to provide when and where and for how long, if it's any time in the last few years. You're going to need employer information for you and your spouse. So that means where you work, your job titles, how long you were there, and what your wages are. You're going to need to know, remember, some people, it's so surprising they don't remember their anniversary, but you're going to need to know your anniversary and the location of where you were married. That's information that goes in your paperwork. If there are any domestic violence or substance abuse issues in your marriage, whether you or the other party, it's important to be honest about that, because that's going to factor in whether you have kids or not. It could be an issue. So you're going to want to write a narrative that includes when the incidents happened, whether anyone got treatment for anything, and when and where. You're going to want names of therapists and dates that you and your spouse may have seen them, especially if there are children, because that it could become relevant if there are children. Collecting this information will take time, so just get it together and put it away, and then when you need it, you have it. That's very helpful. So if you're already underway, then you're going to have to realize, what are the initial documents, and how do I get started, and how do I start thinking about my property? Because everyone hears community property, separate property, and they wonder what that means. So first things you're going to need to know, there are initial there's initial paperwork in every divorce that needs to happen. That includes a petition for divorce. It includes everything in the initial filing, which can include a summons. It can include having someone sign what's called an acceptance of service rather than having to have a process server. So those are initial things that you need to do. There's, in most counties, not all, but most, there are automatic temporary financial restraints that get issued in King County and Snohomish, not currently in Pierce, although you can get one. And that says that no one can buy, sell, dispose of any property without written agreement of the other. It pretty much puts a hold on everything, so someone can't start moving around money and spending down assets. That's important. That's an initial. Yeah.
Michelle, I'm just gonna, there's 2 questions actually in our Q&A specifically about separate property.
Oh,
So
good. I was about to start talking about separate community property. Why don't I just do a basic overview of separate community property, and then I'll take those. That's great, because I was going to get to that. So everyone, and I talk about this in most webinars, everybody has heard that Washington's a community property state, but they don't really know what that means. The seminal issue in every divorce, I'll tell you this first. Divorce with no kids has 2 issues: division of debts and assets, which is division of property, and whether spousal maintenance will apply. Those are the 2 big issues in every case. Divorce with kids has those 2 issues, and it also has parenting plan and child support. So it's really important that you understand about property. What is community property and how do we divide it? And what about separate property? So community property in Washington. Some people think that means property just gets divided 50-50. No, not true. False, wrong. I'll tell you how it really does get divided in a minute. But first, the threshold question is, what is community property and what is separate property? And what does this buzzword mean? Well, it means that in Washington, any assets that are earned during the marriage or potentially in the cohabitation period before the marriage are subject to division and mean by community property, and being that both parties have an interest. It doesn't matter whose name is on it. If you have a 401k, you're putting money in there during the whole marriage, even though it's only in your name. It is not just your money. It is community money, and it will be divided along community lines. So community property is anything that is earned. Also any debts. There's community debts as well as just assets. So it's wages, it's real property, it's a sofa, it's pretty much anything. The only thing it is not are inherited funds that you keep separate. And those are inherited funds that were left to just you. Inheritance by operation of law is separate property in Washington. The only time it's not is if you commingle that inheritance, then it can be gone. So inheritance is separate property. So basically you have everything in the separate property circle I would draw if we were meeting in person, and then you would start to separate things out that are potentially separate property. So that can also be mixed property accounts. Like let's say you have a brokerage account and you're putting money in it 5 years before your marriage, and then you kept putting money in it during the marriage. So there's going to be separate property gains and losses from before the marriage, and there's going to be community gains and losses during the marriage. So bottom line is, first thing we have to do is figure out what is community property, what is separate property. Next thing we have to do is figure out how the heck do we divide the community property and debts. Like I said, we're not what we call a 50-50 state. A lot of people just make that association. I think it's because California is the biggest community property state, and their community property, everything, no matter how long you're married, no matter what you have, is just split 50-50. Not the way in Washington. So what is our standard? Our standard is called just and equitable division of community property. That sounds very vague. What does it mean? It means supposedly whatever is fair, but there's really not a fair. What someone thinks is fair is not what the other person is going to think is fair. So what it really means is a Washington court wants to know more about how long you were married. Is this a short-term, mid-term, or long-term marriage? What kind of assets are we talking about dividing? What is the current financial status of the parties? Does one person make more than the other? Did somebody stay home to take care of the kids? All things like that come into play in deciding what just an equitable division is. It might be 50-50 in some situations, but it might not be. It might be 60-40 in someone's favor. It might be 55-45. It could be a lot of different things. So it's important to know what is community, what is separate, and can my separate property ever be invaded is a question. Can I ever have to give it to the other party? Well, sometimes there are fights over what is separate, what is community, or what a separate property interest in a home might be. There's all kinds of good issues to get into there. So that's a big it depends question. Also too, in long-term marriages of more than 25 years, if one party has a lot of separate property, inheritance or other income or whatever that's separate property, it could be subject to division to equalize the parties. But generally in a shorter marriage, it's not. So anyway, that is a high-level overview on separate and community property. Before I go back to my list of things you should know, Melissa, what questions do people have related to that?
Yeah. Okay, one of them asked about, how a gift or inheritance is separate. So you did kind of touch on that already.
Yeah, gifts and inheritance. This is super important. Actually had a trial case on this year. Gifts and inheritance are separate property unless it is a gift or inheritance to the community. So if, let's say, dad gives you $100,000 towards your mortgage or something, and he writes the card to you and your spouse and says it's to both of you, sorry, it's not your separate, even though it came from your parent. It has to be very explicit that it's just to you. So also too, sometimes someone will give you something without what we would call a gift letter. That can also get messy too, because if you got a gift and you put it in a joint account, it's pretty much gone, unless you can prove that it was a gift intended just to you. So gifts and separate property are separate property by operation of law, unless you commingle them or unless the certainty of the gift is at issue.
Quite a few separate property questions here. Let's see, would it be wise to set up a will or a trust to protect my separate property or assets prior to filing for legal separation or divorce?
No, it would be smart to, I mean, you're going to need a new will after you file for divorce. That's the other thing that comes up, which is way down my list. And we probably won't get to it today. But anytime that you change your marital status, you should update your will. So you're going to want to do that. If you have separate property, it should be protected regardless of whether it's in a trust. So you could wait and do that when you get divorced, because you're going to need to update your will to say that you're not legally married anymore and make different provisions in there. So it's great to be thinking about a will or a trust, but doing it like now isn't going to change anything. And if you're going to file for divorce soon, it's going to look kind of weird that you did that right beforehand. So, I mean, unless you're planning on doing it anyway, I'm not saying it would hurt, but it doesn't change anything, because if you have funds that are already commingled, they're already commingled and it's too late. If you have funds that are not and that are separate property, it's clear that they're your separate property and you can trace that they're your separate property. Then you don't need to have a trust or a will saying that, but you do need a will after you get divorced. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and another question here, in terms of how to protect separate property in the event you're filing for legal divorce or legal separation or divorce. They ask, okay, if I sell my separate property before legal separation or divorce, do the proceeds become part of the community to be equally distributed or not? You mentioned how it's not necessarily equal distribution.
No, just keep it in a separate account. I mean, if you have something that, like, let's say you own a house that was your house before marriage and it's your separate property. Well, if you sell it, keep that money in an account that's only your name. If you take those proceeds and put it into a joint account, start spending out of there while other money is coming in and out, you could commingle it beyond recognition and then poof, it's gone. So don't do that.
So may I rent my separate property for income before or during legal separation or divorce? And is that income community or no?
Well, you really should consult with an attorney, because, I can't give you just positive information with only little bits of information. In general, income generated from separate property residence is separate property. However, there could be a community lien or claim on a separate property residence if you're using community funds to do repairs or to fund the mortgage or any of those things. So you really need to talk to somebody in more detail about your situation.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut that off, but I can't just give you ad hoc advice.
More complicated questions. How about if property is awarded from a previous divorce, is that separate property, and does that just remain separate if a second marriage happens years later?
Yeah, you got to keep it separate though. And really too, if people have these really specific questions, I highly recommend, it doesn't have to be with me, but talk to somebody, because anything I'm telling you now is very general. This is not legal advice. We don't have an attorney-client relationship, and I can't possibly know all of the factors that could go in here. But in general, so I'm giving you very basic information about the law and information, but not advice. So if you have an award from a prior marriage, that's your separate property. If you put it in a community account or you use it for community things, it could have a community interest or lien. If you buy something, let's say you buy a house and both of you are on title, but you use some of that separate property settlement for the down payment, you have a separate property interest in the home, but it's still a community home. So there's a lot of variables here. What I'm trying to do is tell you it depends, and it's complicated, but you're asking great questions.
Yeah. Are bank accounts in one person's name considered community property? Can be.
Yes. Yeah, like what I said earlier, name on title does not control in Washington. I could have an account and I'm putting, I don't know, tons of money in it during my divorce. And if I'm doing that, if I have a consultation and I'm, setting up just tons and tons of accounts, even though they're in my name, if it's during, for example, my marriage and I'm married and it's from my income, then it's community money and my husband has an interest in it, even if it's an account sitting in my name, because any wages during the marriage are community unless you have a prenuptial or postnuptial agreement that says otherwise. So I should mention that too. Prenuptials, postnuptials, those change the character of property and how it's decided. So what I'm talking about is if you don't have an agreement, and frankly, most people don't. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like blow anyone off or say I don't want to answer your questions, but I don't want you to rely on what I'm telling you without me having all the information. That's not responsible.
Right.
And let's go back to what I said earlier. I don't believe in telling people just what they want to hear. That's not helpful. So I'm not going to tell you I think something is your property if I don't know. So anyway, I want you to have information and not just base decisions that you're going to make based on things that are like bits of information. So anyway, best money that you'll ever spend is sitting down and talking to someone about your own situation. But you're getting a lot of good information here too. So hopefully that helps. Any other separate property or community property questions, or should I go back to my list?
If I think you kind of answered this, if the gifts never go into a joint account, are they community property?
Not if it's a gift to you. If it's a gift to you and you keep it separate and you can prove it's a gift to you, like if dad gives you $500 and you put it in an account and he gave it to you and it was in a birthday card or something, then it's yours. If dad gave you a Christmas card to you and Johnny and says, oh, I love you both so much, here's our gift, well, then it's both of yours, no matter what account it goes in. So anyway, the intent of the gift is a huge thing. Just put it that way.
Lots of questions, good ones. What about marriage like or CIR with kids? How to determine what's community and separate property there? Do I have any right to community money?
Oh, I love CIR questions. All right. Okay. I wasn't going to answer all these questions today, but you know what? That's fine. Okay. CIR, committed intimate relationship. Let's talk about that for a minute. A lot of people have never heard that term, but they should, because in Washington, I mentioned this briefly earlier about a cohabitation period and community assets. Washington is a state that recognizes what are called committed intimate relationships, or CIRs. A lot of states don't. California does not. So that means if you are in an unmarried relationship, and you have to burden of proving it too, by the way. You can't just be like, oh, we live together, we have a CIR. Not true. It needs to be a committed, intimate relationship that's just like it sounds. It's committed, it's intimate, can't be a roommate relationship. It's stable, you both pool resources. There's all kinds of factors. There's 5 factors actually the court gets to consider, and they're not weighted in any one way. But if you're asserting that you have a CIR, essentially community property applies just the way it does if you were married. So some people might live together for 10 years and think, oh, we kept separate accounts and we never got married, so my money's mine and his money is his. Wrong. Probably not true. If you have been putting money into a 401k all those years or a savings account, other party might have a community interest in it. Rules for community property division are still the same. CIRs are a little bit more difficult because with CIRs you need to look at whether it's a strong case and you can prove it, whether the other party's really going to fight you on it in litigation. Most of the time, it's pretty easy to tell if it's a legitimate CIR. Sometimes people have been together less than 2 years, probably not long enough to be what would be considered a CIR. So there you go. There's probably not a lot of assets up for division. Anyway, that's a little bit about CIRs. What was the rest of that question?
Yeah, it's around kind of community property issues when there's a CIR. Is there any right to community money in that situation?
Yeah, it's what we call it quasi-community, because you don't really a community if you're not married, but it is community-like money or quasi-community. I prefer community-like. That makes more sense. It's community-like money. So yes, there's a right to community property. I've had some CIR cases where, people have been together a long time and one party would leave the relationship with absolutely nothing if the community wasn't divided. So yes, you absolutely potentially, if you can prove CIR, have the right to any income or assets earned during that time. And keep in mind too, that it means debt too. So if one person is taking out a bunch of credit card debt and that's, attributable to the community during an unmarried relationship, you could be on the hook for that too. So yes.
Great.
CIR, get a consultation about it. It's not a simple issue.
It sounds complicated. One last property question here, just how are inherited hard assets dealt with?
Well, same thing. Hard assets, meaning something that's like movable, what I would call personalty or personal property, a vehicle, maybe. One favorite inherited item in one of my cases was like a baby grand piano, things like that, right? The baby grand piano was one of my favorite ones, also because it's cool, but also because, one party used it and the one who it wasn't inherited used it all the time. And then when they split up, they wanted that asset and they didn't get it. Inherited hard items are usually kept in a community residence, and that doesn't change their character. Character of an inherited asset, whether it's an account, whether it's dollars, whether it's a piano or whatever, is established at the time it's inherited or gifted. Inheritance and gifts are both the same. So if you've got a trunk of valuables or jewelry or just items that are sentimental to you that are inherited, those items, they don't change their character, even if like you have that baby grand piano and someone uses it, even if you never did, because it was inherited by you. So that's really important. You can't change the character of those items. If they have a tremendous value, here's the one thing though, if they have in a long-term marriage, if they have a tremendous value, like let's say you have stuff that's, you know, a bunch of jewelry, watches, whatever, that piano, you have a bunch of stuff and it's appraised at a ton of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever. It has to be a lot to really make a difference. Well, then that increases your separate property versus the other party, right? And so the other party in a long-term marriage, if you're getting divorced, they're, depending on your age too, the older you are, the more there's an interest in the two of you being equalized into perpetuity, which means you got to have equal assets. So maybe the community's $2 million, so you each get 1 million, easy math problem, right? But if the other person has a $500,000 in, you know, separate property, it's a good chance that that's going to need to be divided too, since it's a long-term marriage. So if that $500,000 is a gun collection and rare coins, you're probably going to have to look at dividing that too. So anyway, but that's a very fact-specific situation. If you're in a long-term marriage, also depends on your ages, depends on the kind of assets, depend on a lot of other things. So again, these are just information for you, but not dispositive. Anything else before I move on?
We can go ahead and move on. I know you have a lot of other things you wanted to cover. We just had a lot of property questions.
Well, we did good questions too. I like the questions today. It's kind of, that's more fun. I want to tell you what you want to know, not necessarily just
the only other question that's outstanding here, which you sort of covered, but maybe you could go into a little more, is how to prepare for the initial consultation with an attorney. And you're kind of talking about that now.
Yeah, and I was going to talk about that a lot later, but we're totally going to run out of time, but that's okay. Okay. 3 things, and I think this is my big 3, and I tell everybody this with respect to any professional relationship, and I really apply them because I think they make sense. I'll tell you how to prepare in a minute, but it's less about the dollars and cents and what you should bring and all that kind of good stuff. It's about these 3 things. One is trust. Be looking in the consultation for whether you trust that this attorney knows what they're talking about, and you trust them, and you trust that they're going to represent your position in a way that you feel comfortable with. Trust. On the other side of the coin, the attorney needs to trust you. If they don't trust you or you're not honest with them, it's not going to work. So trust is the first one. I think of it as like a stool. You need all 3 legs. Second one is communication. You need to have good communication. So be looking in the consultation for good communication, a communication style that you can relate to. I think it's also really important to ask, if you're somebody that, you know, never goes on email and avoids email, is the attorney going to be able to accommodate that and have you pick up the phone and talk to them if you need to, or come into the office for a meeting, or to bring in documents if you don't email documents? So communication style that works for you, and also just the flexibility to communicate in the way that you want. Because if you tell the attorney, I don't email, and the attorney sends everything via email, your communication is going to be terrible. Or if you're the kind of person that just can't deal with the stress of it on a phone call and wants to come in and sit down, it's a little harder in COVID, but it happens. Or we could do Zoom. You know, you need to make that known and make sure the attorney can do it. So trust and communication are the first 2. The third one is ask questions about the fee structure and make sure you can afford it. Trust, communication, and economics. Because if you can't afford it, the whole relationship is going to be about, you know, you not being able to afford the fee. You're going to be stressed about it. You're going to be worried about it. So figuring out what your expectation is for how much it's going to cost you to get started, whether you might be able to get funds from the community to pay for fees later, or the other party should be paying for your fees. But you really need those 3 things, because like you could trust me and not be able to afford to pay me, and then our whole relationship would become about that and it would never work. Or you could pay me $1 million and not be able to communicate with me and never call me back, and it wouldn't work. So you really have to have all 3 things. So when you go to a consultation, look for those 3, because they're not going to be the same for everyone. I mean, I could have great communication with one client, and for whatever the reason, they don't trust me or they don't like women or whatever, it's never going to work. And you don't have to, like, I tell everyone this, if it's me or anybody, if it's an accountant, you don't have to like them and, you know, want to have a glass of wine with them. You just have to like them enough and be able to communicate, which is that second pillar, that you can communicate with them to give them information about your case. Because I can't take action in your case without information. And some people are so paralyzed by retaining an attorney that, you know, going to the consultation is a huge thing, and having the consultation and then retaining someone is a huge thing. And then they're like, I took these steps, and then you don't hear from them for weeks and nothing can happen. And that is understandable, but then it goes back to that emotional support piece. You need someone to help you take action, because I can't help you take action. I can tell you what we need, but if you can't communicate and you don't trust us, it's not going to work. So really look for those three things. As far as getting ready for the consultation, it depends on the issues in your case. Sometimes it will be helpful for you to, and this is what I was kind of going over a list. So sometimes it'll be helpful if your case has already started. You'll want to get together initial documents. If you have them, the attorney might want to see them, or they can sometimes pull them up on the court record. If there's a restraining order or protection order, you're going to want to bring that. If there's a pre or post-nuptial agreement, you're definitely going to want to bring that. Anything like that at all. You're basically just going to want to come and tell your story and talk about what your most important concerns are, and try to get some answers. Now, you're not going to get answers to the magic of your case in an hour. Like, we would be completely magicians if we could do that. But what you are going to hopefully get is a roadmap of how it could go and what's involved, and an overview of those issues I mentioned earlier. Division of the community, division of debts and assets, number one. What's likely in my situation? I've been a stay-at-home wife for 20 years and the other party is still working. What am I going to get? Or we've been married for 4 years and it's just not going to happen that we're going to stay together. What does that look like? Those are two very different questions. So you're going to want to get an idea, though, about division of debts and assets based on your situation. You're going to want to get an idea if spousal maintenance is going to be an issue in your case. And spousal maintenance, I think I mentioned it earlier, it's the Washington term for alimony. A lot of people are more familiar with the alimony phrase, which is support payments post-divorce from one party to the other. Spousal maintenance is the exact same thing. It just has a friendlier term. And then the next thing, if you have kids, is you're going to deal with a parenting plan. So you're probably going to talk to the attorney about, be ready to talk about the current status quo of your parenting, who does what, if you have any concerns about the other parent, whether it's substance abuse or violence or neglect, or whether you co-parent, great, you just don't want to be married to them. No matter what it is, you're going to want to be prepared to talk about those things. A parenting plan is what some states call a custody order. Washington doesn't really use the term custody. We use parenting plan, residential schedule. We use friendlier terms, kind of like maintenance. So yeah, anyway, that would be super helpful for you to have that information ready. And then the last thing is child support, and that really relates to income of the parties, age of the children, and the county that you live in. That's how it's calculated in Washington. So that information is usually kind of one of the last things that you figure out, because you need to figure out first where the kid's going to live and who's going to have how much money. So just go to the consultation ready to talk about those 4 issues, ready to talk about any other issues that have happened, whether it's just stress in your marriage, whether it's DV, or just, you want to give the attorney some background for kind of how we got to be where we are, and they can help you talk about the best ways to move forward. So that is a little bit about what to bring to a consultation. So I hope that is helpful. I think what I will do now, since what time is, we don't have a lot of time, do we?
A lot of time, yeah.
All right, I'm not going to we're going to have to do a part 2 of this one, because I have a lot of stuff to tell you and we answered a bunch of questions. So that's okay. It's better, like I said, to answer questions. I will go over a few, but we talked about property. So let's talk about a few more things about property. One thing I'm going to just give as a tip that I think is super helpful. People get so bogged down in personal property. They obsess over it. I don't know why, but it is a thing. I think it's a cultural thing too. I mean, what do you see all the time, especially this time of year? Shopping. What are you going to buy? What are you going to have? People get really attached to stuff. And I mean, it makes sense. If you've got a box of stuff that's yours from when you were a kid, obviously you want to keep it and that's yours. But I have people get into fights about just the stupidest thing. I mean, you're fighting about a sofa. Well, this is news to everyone, but they need to know it. Some people will come in with a huge value of what they think the stuff in the house is worth, unless it can be appraised and it's antique, or it's something along those lines that can be appraised. You will get garage sale value if you end up fighting about that in court, and the court will get really irritated. So your sofa that maybe you paid Pottery Barn $4,000 for, it's probably worth $200, $100 at the most. So in the divorce world. So what I tell people to do is this: make an inventory, get to work. On what you and your spouse own. Use an Excel sheet or Google Sheets if you want, or just a piece of paper will even work. And make 3 columns. 1 column for what you think is yours, either a gift, an inheritance, what you think is theirs or you are fine with them having, and then 1 column for the items you think are going to be decided upon that you both might want. This is like a really great place to start. And then you can work off of that later with your attorney or with your spouse if you get along, to try and move things along. It's much better than having to figure out later, and everyone will tell you to make a sheet. So make a sheet. If you don't have access to the home because you've moved out, you might want to ask your attorney about getting a video inventory. Someone can just go through and take a video of what's in the house. But don't fight about personal property. Personal property is also something that can be easily decided outside of court in arbitration or something if really need be, but it's just never worth it to spend a lot of attorney's fees on personal property, but it always comes up. Another thing is real property. We already talked about some of this earlier in our early conversations. Real property, you'll hear that term, it's real estate. Homes, land, condominiums, rental houses, anything will need to be accounted for, valued, and eventually the value will need to be divided between you and your spouse. A big mistake some attorneys make is splitting up the value of a house on an asset and debt sheet. You can't do that. Because you can't give someone half of a house. So, you know, in a situation like that, you basically will need to talk to someone to figure out who's keeping the house, who can afford to keep the mortgage, who can't, if you know, a lot of different things. But anyway, one thing that you can do, and you'll be ahead of the curve, is if you get information together, like get all your addresses in one place when you're doing that information sheet I talked about earlier, get your property tax information, so a statement and whether it's paid with your mortgage or not with your mortgage. A lot of people don't know that, and that's important. If you're not the one paying the bill, you still want to know that. Insurance policy, if the insurance is paid with the mortgage or paid separately. Also get together what your current loan balance is on each piece of real property, and whether there's a home equity line as well, or whether there's just one mortgage. So you'll want all of those, and having them at the date of separation is great. If you don't have access to the information, don't panic or worry. You'll get it during the process. But if you do have it, just get it, and you're like ahead of the game putting that aside. Same thing with vehicles. Make a list of any vehicle, any VIN number, how many miles it has on it, the make and model, and then it's easy for us to get a value on it. Also, if there's a loan on it, we want to know what the balance is on that. Get your most recent statements. So that's a little bit about personal and real property. So getting your statements and documents together is a big part of this process. So download everything directly to a secure folder. You can use, if you don't have ability to do that and you have paper statements, you can use the notes application on any iPhone. It's free to take PDFs of things. You cannot send the court or your attorney JPEG pictures. It does us no good and we can't use them. So you either want to just download directly to a secure thing like Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever it is you want to use. Or in our office, we send people a share file, which is a secure encrypted file to upload things to, and get us your statements when we ask for them. So everybody's going to need your statements. You're going to want to get together 6 months of statements from every account that you have. And that's going to help you a lot if you start doing that. You want to get documents together. So any current wills or trusts, any powers of attorneys, any, like I said, insurance policy declarations, if you have them. It's also really smart to get a copy of your free current credit report. So you know, like if the other party has taken out any debts that you might not know about that are also in your name, you can go to annualcreditreport.com and pull all 3 credit bureaus for free once a year. So that's like a super great resource. And if you are an unmarried couple separating and you have children, you want to make sure you have copies of the birth certificates to determine, you know, who is, if both parents are on the birth certificate, or if that's something that needs to be dealt with. So the financial deep dive really is the 6 months of all financial statements. That means everything: bank accounts, retirement, investment accounts, mortgages, car loans, credit cards, all of it. A year of pay stubs you're going to want. You're going to want 2 years of complete tax returns, personal and business returns, including W-2s and 1099s. You're going to want to know if either party has a safe deposit box and what's in there, if there's much cash in there. If there is an HSA in the family and there's information, you're going to want 6 months of statements for that. Inheritance would be great to document if you got it, when you got it, who it came from, where you keeping it, was it already spent, if so, on what. Sometimes too, you know, you could get, this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. Let's say you got an inheritance and you kept it separate, and then you remodeled a bathroom and spent $50,000 from the inheritance on that to a community home. You could have a community lien for that. So you're going to want to document that so it doesn't get forgotten about. Also, student loans, that is a whole other conversation. You're going to want to have statements for that. Promissory notes that you owe or people owe you or your spouse, you're going to want to have that. So get your documentation together and put it in a folder. Even if it's not perfectly sorted, you'll be ahead of the game. Another way to prepare is set up your own account. A lot of people in marriages have their own accounts. A lot of people don't. If you don't, if you operate largely on joint accounts during the marriage, it's time to get your own accounts. Set up your own checking and savings, change your direct deposit to your own account post-separation, unless you've been ordered not to. You should talk to an attorney before doing that, but that's super important. And then start working on your new monthly budget is also extremely important. So you might be panicking about how you're going to afford life post-divorce. So when you start working with an attorney, we'll have you do a financial declaration, figure out what you're spending on what, so we can figure out what you're going to need. But you can start working on this on your own. You can say, What are my housing costs going to be post-divorce? What are my utilities and which ones? What are my vehicle expenses, loan payment, insurance, gas and maintenance, children expenses, tuition, childcare, out-of-pocket medical, monthly debt payments, loans, credit cards, personal loans, student loans? What is my monthly outlay? A lot of people have no idea. And so it's a great place to get started with that. And you're going to be in a great position to be ahead of the curve when you need to do financial declaration if you do that on your own. Evaluate your career, which sounds weird, but important to say, am I doing something that I'm going to continue doing? Am I doing something where I'm going to make more money or less money? Has my job been impacted by COVID or the economy, or am I being laid off? If so, am I going to need retraining? Because that could be an issue in your divorce. If you need to go back to school, that could be an issue for support. So look at what your situation is and be ready to talk about that. Insurance, we talked about that a little bit earlier. What about my will? Somebody talked about that earlier. I always want to touch on that. You're going to need to update wills and power of attorney after divorce. It's a really good idea. Don't stress about it now. Just keep it on the radar for later. Self-care, I didn't talk nearly enough about this. Talked about the need for therapy. It's so important. But I mean, get yourself, like take that 30 minutes for yourself, go for a walk. I mean, you don't have to go to the gym or whatever, but go for a walk, do something to clear your mind. Physical and mental health are so important during this process. And we really see a difference between clients that prioritize that and clients that don't. Keep it civil. I've said this before in other webinars. I'll say it again. People want to know, number one, how much is my divorce going to cost? And I tell them this, it's going to cost as much as you and your spouse make it cost. So if you fight about every little thing and you're nasty, you're going to spend more money, and that's not good for anyone. And it raises your stress level. So, don't be someone that's punitive just to be punitive. Sure, maybe the other person needs to be put in their place a little bit. Maybe they're doing things that are not great, but leave that to an attorney. Don't get involved in sending nasty text messages, because I promise you they'll be read in court or stuck on a declaration. Don't do that. Keep it civil. Take the high road. As hard as it can be, just do it. Don't go to war against your ex. You need to do what's best for your children. Doesn't mean don't protect them and yourself, but the only people who win in divorce wars are lawyers. And I'm a lawyer that will tell you that we don't want to fight this kind of wars. I mean, some attorneys do, and well, I'm not one of those kinds of attorneys, but it's not worth the stress for you. It's not the way that we want to earn your money. So it only hurts you. So don't do it. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's tempting to try and get your spouse back for the pain that they inflicted. I'm not saying that, but talk to a therapist about that. We'll talk to you about how to get the best result, but I'm not going to talk to you about how to make their life a living hell, because I'm just not going to. So anyway, what else? I think that's it for now. There's a ton of other stuff that we could go through, but I think we're just going to end on that. If there's any last questions, we've got a few minutes, so I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll see you next time, I hope.
There is one more question here in the Q&A, Michelle. It says regarding child support, how much weight does Washington place on overnights to determine child support payments? It's kind of a random.
Child support's completely based on overnights. Not like per night though. Like some states will actually get into calculating per night, which is bizarre to me. We don't do that. We just look at one question is, so here's how child support's calculated. It's based on the income of parents. So a couple that makes $5,000 a month combined and doesn't make a lot is going to have different child support payments than a couple that makes $25,000 a month combined and is over the income limit. So the income where child support maxes out is a combined income of $12,000 a month. So the calculations don't change after that. So it's going to be income of the spouses, county that you live in, because that recognizes cost of living in King County is higher than maybe Chelan County, and the age of your children. And that recognizes that kids who are 12 and above, sport's a little higher because they're eating more, you need to get them clothes more, things like that. And then there's two columns, right? You have total support amount, and this is a calculation. And then you look at each party and you say, okay, who has the kids more? And so it's based on number of nights. There's a primary residential parent, and then there's a non-residential parent. And the primary residential is who has the kids more in basically a 4-week period out of 28 nights. We always look at it out of 14 days. So a 50-50 plan is where those 14 days are divided right down the middle. And so out of 28 days, somebody has 14, the other person has 14. An every other weekend plan that might have somebody, every other weekend and maybe a midweek overnight, they have only like 6 nights a month, right? I mean, that's not a lot. But if you have someone who has 6 nights a month, someone who has 4 nights a month, someone who has 10 nights a month, they're all going to be not primary residential, and it doesn't mean the child support amount changes. Nights is what is used to dictate who is the primary parent. The primary parent in most cases receives child support from the other parent. Each party on the child support worksheets has their own portion of that amount based on the income of both of the parties, the age, and the county the kid lives in. And then the non-residential parent pays their portion to the residential parent. There's also a division of basically what we call pro rata share. You take those numbers and you figure out, let's say I make 60% of the income. So my pro rata share is 60%. Parent B makes 40% of the income. Their share is 40%. So for things like out-of-pocket medical, work-related childcare, things that are not covered by child support, you guys would split those things 60-40 along those lines. Now, if you were on a 50-50 parenting plan, that could be a reason for no child support if the parties make the same amount of money, or if they don't, and it would be a hardship to one party, then there might just be a deviation since one party gets a little more credit for time with the children, or maybe not. So there's a lot of factors to know, but we do not break down by night. We break down though by night when it comes down to who has more nights in a 28-day period. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. So we are going to have to end because we're just past our time here. I know we didn't get to every question, but I wanted to leave the contact slide here so that you can contact either one of us if you're interested in a legal or a therapy consultation. Michelle mentioned earlier that there's a couple other events that are happening. We do have a meetup group that we do tonight. Yeah, it's once a month on Wednesday nights, and it is this evening, and it's through the Meetup app, and we're joined by a certified real estate specialist as well as a financial planner, and so that's a really helpful event to
It's fun. We just answer your questions the whole time. It's actually fun. We used to do it in person, and we can't do that during COVID, but it's fun and it's really helpful. So feel free to join that. And then if you leave your information, we will reach out to you. Thank you for coming, and you can contact us if you want to schedule something, or we'll have our client liaison contact you. But I just want to stress to you too, it's great if you want to follow up and chat and do a consult. But the purpose of this really, it's not that, even though you might think that it is. I really want people to have more information as they think about divorce and get some of your stress alleviated. Because as we come to the end of the year, this is the last thing that I just want to say, the last couple of years have been insanely stressful because of the world we live in. It's just magnified everything. So I can tell you that if you go into the year thinking about divorce and with uncertainty, like so many people do, it's going to ruin your holidays. It's going to put a lot of pressure on you at the beginning of the year. Coming to peace with what you want to do right now, whether it's what Melissa said earlier and you want to just commit to taking divorce off the table and working on the relationship will give you peace of mind, or whether you're like, I can't do this anymore and I need to move forward, that can give you peace of mind. And scheduling a consult or saying, I'm going to do it in January, or I'm going to commit to therapy in January, or whatever, coming to some kind of certainty for you at the end of the year, even though it's just a date on the calendar, it seems to be really important to a lot of people. And I think that's why a lot of people say divorce season is like January to April, because people panic and feel they need to do something. So try to find out what's right for you. Take the time. This wasn't as much information as I wanted to get to because we had a lot of great questions, but educate yourself, get the divorce education. You'll be glad that you did, and you'll find some peace of mind. To me, that is just the most important thing. You cannot make good decisions for yourself if you're operating from a place of survival or stress. You just really can't. So I hope that helps. It was great to get so many good questions and so many people attending, and we wish you well and hope to see you next time. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Again, we do these monthly, so you'll be hearing from us about the next webinar, and keep an eye out for our meetups as well. Take care. Bye-bye.